Welcome again, everyone. And to those that are going to be seeing this later, welcome. And I hope you are enjoying your beautiful day. We are now in the second of this webinar series that the APCA and myself, Carolina Crone, have put together to think about the power of photography and how to use it in ethical ways and develop different practices that can help share the stories and the amazing work that you all are doing to be able to magnify and spread it as much as possible. So today I'm going to share my screen here. And okay. All righty. Okay. So I want to go through we had a little bit of homework that we're going to go through in a minute. Thank you so much for those of you that were able to send stuff into Eve. And I just want to go through, this is just sort of a background of the different things that we're going to be covering in these three sessions. For those of you that were able to join us for the first session, we were doing more of the thinking about imagery and all the messaging that comes towards us from images, the role of the photographer and how rarely the photographer is considered, and sort of beginning thoughts on individual and collective ethical obligations in terms of consent and model releases. And today's focus, our second one in the series, is going to be really looking more at the technical aspects of sort of the basics of photography. And Eve and I have customized this to try and make it as user-friendly for you all in your different roles as possible, and basically to help improve communication for all of the great work that you all are doing. And then in December 4th, we'll be covering the third one that will talk more about best practices once you've made the images, right? You've made the images, and what do you do with them? Sort of what we can call post-production, sort of after we've made it. So we'll look more into that. And so let's go through. Let me stop here.
I can talk about my own photo, which is on now. Blow my trumpet.
Which one was yours, Eve? I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you.
This very one is my own.
Okay, great. Go right ahead.
Yes, and the story behind this is I wanted to show that palliative care can happen anywhere. This is a very simple structure. The floor doesn't even have cement, and a couple of other things are going on in the room, but palliative care was still happening, and it was possible to get a smile from the client who was receiving the palliative care. That's what I want to say about my photo.
Okay, great. And in terms of how you since you were in the room, right, you have a different experience and a different memory of the photo. Yeah. So for the viewers, often the photographer has much more context and much more understanding, right, of the situation. For the viewers, if you were, I know, Eve, this is going to be a lot to ask, but if you could erase your physical body from the experience of being in the room, what does the photo convey?
It shows a shared consultation going on between one person and the other. Probably the person leading the consultation is the one who has the paper at the side. And as I can see, the client or the lady has a smile. It means the quality of interaction is good. the care provider is also welcoming and she's smiling. And then the assessment forms are open, they are being shared, it is not a secret. So the care plan seems to be shared between the two. Yes.
Yeah, I saw two people who are much interested in whatever they are doing, and then there is a kind of bond between them. The smile alone shows that the one giving the service is happy to give, and then the one at the receiving end is also happy to receive whatever care or service the provider is giving, and they are all satisfied.
Yeah, thank you, Dorcas.
So I'm going to add a few things here. So agree with everything that everybody has shared here. And for a non person that's immersed in the palliative care, how would we know that this is palliative care? Would be one question. And then we're going to go through various kinds of lighting today and composition and tips. And so I want everybody to just think about what the light is in this room. Just consider how we are seeing these people that are working, right? And so I'm just going to leave that there, and the composition, right, in terms of the edges of the photo, how close or far away, what angle the camera is, and where the photographer is, right? Think about where the photographer is in relationship to these people, right? And then I think what I'm going to do just quickly is go through some of the other pictures that were submitted. Okay, I see another comment here. Satisfied also about learning and that serving the other person. Okay, great. Thank you for that. These pictures that were submitted from a news setting, right? From CNN, I believe, and the BBC was the other one of the papal visit, right? So I'm going to ask the same questions for people just to begin looking at: where is the photographer? Where is the light coming from? What else is going on in the photo that gives us information? And what is the angle, right? Are we at eye level? Are we above? Are we below? And I'm going to keep going and ask the same questions for the other one, right? So this looks like some sort of advertisement, as us Americans would say, or advertisement, as many of you would say, the English speakers, of course. And the ad here for Hospice UK, right, is quoting somebody, and we could maybe guess that this is that person, right? And if we look at the photo, again, I'm going to ask you the same questions. Where is the photographer? Where is the light coming from? And how does one engage with the photo? What are you thinking about in terms of what's going on here? What is the photo communicating? Okay, and I'm going to keep going. So could be work, could be personal time, hard to know exactly. And again, same question. What is the feeling of the photo? Where is the photographer? What kind of light? What kind of angles? What is the photo communicating here? Okay. And here we have another news photo, right? A lot of stressful images that are in the news often. All right. Where is the light coming from? What is going on here? And in this particular one, what is out of the frame that we're not seeing? And where does our mind go? What are we imagining? Okay, and then same thing with this one. Where are we? And where is the photographer? What's the light doing? And what does it express? And then the angle, right? Why is the photographer choosing this angle, and what is it communicating? Okay. The value of one single tree. And I don't know if, I don't know if this, also grief. Yes, thank you for that other image. Yes. And thank you for the people responding into the chat. I see that. And I appreciate your contributions here. And thank you for the people arriving, introducing yourselves as you come in. So here we have the value of one single tree. So I'm going to also ask here, same thing. The photographer's making a decision here where they're positioning themselves. And what is this conveying? How would it be different if we didn't have the caption? What type of light is there in the picture? And what are the angles that are being chosen, right? What's the perspective? This is a great variety of photos. I appreciate that. Okay, same thing here. How different is the light from here to here? And we're going to get further into this today. And what is being communicated by the angle, by the closeness of the shot? What do we think is happening? Where does our mind go, right, when we see these images? And we tend to see them pretty quickly, right? And then the one that we started off, right, with the papal visit. And this is a great variety. Thank you so much for the folks that submitted them. And hopefully that was a good warm-up for you all. We're going to go through today some of the fundamentals of photography. And we're going to try and focus things on what will be the most achievable for you all without a lot of complicated gear, without a huge number of things that you're going to need to have in the field or to acquire. And this quote I felt also was really beautiful synergy with what we were talking about in the first webinar series, right, from Thich Nhat Hanh, turning on the light. Forgetfulness is the darkness. Mindfulness is the light. I bring awareness to shine upon all life, right? So it's not just awareness of ourselves and our relations with the people that we're working with. It is also an attention to light in the photography. So I was happy to find that. And, you know, we have all kinds of options for now, so many phones and cameras and all kinds of things. And I just want to say that, you know, the things that I'm going to stick with are, you know, mostly guessing that people will have phones as the most easy, right, way to make a photo these days, but that some people might have kind of basic, whether they be point and shoots or other mirrorless or DSLR cameras. And so all of the things that I will say will be applicable sort of across these things and into other formats, larger format cameras as well, if you have some exposure to that. Okay. And for, you know, those of us that are word nerds, photography, right, when you break it down, is literally that you are writing with light, right? You're sculpting a space using light. So I'm going to spend a few minutes talking about light and hoping that you will start to see light a little bit differently. And just a reminder too, that these things take time and practice, and that, you know, I'm going to be giving you a lot of information, and some things may not be completely clear, and I'll take a moment to pause and take questions, and I'll do my best to give a relatively simple explanation of things, but some of the things that I will be talking about are quite complex. So please communicate if there's there's anything that you want some clarification on. Okay, so light. I am a huge fan of daylight. It is the most generous of light in some ways. It can create the most beautiful, in my humble opinion, light. It can be very soft, and it can also be hard depending on the time of day. So in this photo, in the next couple of photos that I have, we're going to talk about a little bit about what is referred to as soft and hard light. And what this is speaking to is usually the time of day and the quality of light that you will see. So in this particular photo of this couple, you can see around the edges of particularly the gentleman's head, right, that this is the pointing towards the direction of the light. And the background is blurred. The focus is very much on the couple. They are the center of the photo. And the light is very soft. I would guess that this is an hour, maybe an hour or two before sunset, right? Often referred to as the golden hours. And the same thing I would say for sunrise, right? This time has some of the most beautiful light because the rays are literally longer and they are softer to the eye and to cameras that are capturing them. And I'm afraid that I'm going to have to move the chat box here. I don't know if sorry that my chat box is blocking some of these. I hope that you can move yours around too. So this would be an example of something that's a little harder light. And one way that you can determine whether or not, like this would be probably taken more in the middle of the day. So if you look at the light around the side of his face, right, it's casting shadows, not just on his face, but you see the big shadow on the red wall behind him. And so this can be used, you know, to your advantage, right, and in your compositions, but it's also can be an unflattering light, and I'll show you some examples of that later. Okay, so another one just to continue thinking about light, right? Shadows are often clues about where the sun is, or if you're using lamps or other sorts of lights, the shadow will always tell you the direction of where the light is coming from. So there are many different kinds of natural light, right? Candlelight is also a beautiful light. You'll see how warm this is. And one thing that we're going to talk about in a little bit is sort of the range of the color spectrum. And as you'll note, this has a very almost orange reddish tone to it within sort of what the light is giving off. And if you look towards the lights in the back, which are probably people's flashlights on their phones, that light has a different quality than the candle light, right? So there's all kinds of different available light that one can use. This is I don't know if anybody has ever seen bioluminescence on the water and the amazing things that that shine in certain waters. So this is also available light. It's obviously pretty dark, but you know, the stars give off light, the moon, all of these things are natural light that aren't going to be additive light to anything that we're doing. Okay, so for this example, I wanted to start looking at what is it that you are thinking about in terms of somebody's position, right? So in some of those photos that we were looking at from the homework, I asked you to note where the light was coming from, right? And here is a good example of the different things that are created in terms of mood, in terms of, you know, where our mind goes with the light, in terms of how it affects our response. So perhaps some of these feel more accessible, right? And the thing with photography that is really an art is that you want to be able to use all of these tools that you have, your lighting, your composition, your framing, you know, how close you are to the subject, your focus, all of these different things are going to communicate things. So the young girl on the front lit on the left is squinting because of the light, right? She's not comfortable. And the second one, the side lit, you know, it's a little more dramatic, right? Her expression is also affecting this, obviously, right? And the backlit one and the open shade one have a very different feeling, right? And so these are all things when you are approaching a subject or in a room that you want to be assessing as you're about to take a picture. What is the light and the angle going to do to the emotion and the expression that will be captured here? Okay, so I'm going to keep going. Okay, so so for many folks, we're going to be taking pictures on phones, and these numbers are actually references to lens sizes and millimeters, right? For those of you that might be already versed in this. So a 35 millimeter is a slightly wider lens. A 50 millimeter is that much closer, and an 85 millimeter is that much closer, right? So each of these just create different kinds of images, right? And again, it all has to do with what you're trying to communicate. If the context of where the person is important, then hopefully it will be obvious that the wider one that shows more of the place, right, is a good choice. And on phones nowadays, you can also have additional zoom lenses, or it won't tell you the numbers, but you also have the zoom in function, right? That essentially you're doing the same thing. You may not be aware of what millimeter the lens is going to in terms of the focal length, but it's essentially doing the same thing, right? So each of these communicate different things and are all just choices that we have, all tools that we have in our toolkit, right? As we're making pictures. I included this for a couple of reasons, and we'll review it in another way down the road as well. So there's two things that you know, we're considering when we're making pictures, and this is used often in motion photography and film and video, and but it's useful for still photography as well, right? Because we're thinking about both where the photographer is, right, on the left, like are they eye level with the subject, shoulder level, hip level, knee level, ground level, right? And there's also different terminology for this in terms of angles, and we'll talk about that in a second. But sort of thinking about where the camera and the photographer are on the one end. And then also overhead is an option, right? The sort of bird's eye view from above. And then on the right, you'll see different descriptions of terminology that is common in terms of basically crops, right? How close you're getting. And this is useful also for people that are trying to think through what they want to ask somebody to take a picture of, right? And we'll go through different examples, and hopefully that will become clearer in terms of maybe you give some direction to somebody saying, you know, we're hoping to make a picture of this, and you leave it very general, whereas using language like this might help get you closer to what you're trying to communicate. And we'll look at more of that in a second as well. Okay, so here I want to start focusing on angles. So hopefully everybody's gotten used to thinking about where the photographer is and how they're utilizing the composition to create a mood and to create a feeling, right? So here the photographer is below the subject, right? It's called a low angle photo. And I'm going to put this out so if folks can respond to this in the chat. What's the feeling that is conveyed from the photographer being below the subject? What is the feeling that we get when we look at these photos? I'm gonna see if how folks feel about this. What's the yeah, what's the feeling? Okay. Okay, thank you. Power, confidence, haughtiness. Okay. So, great. Definitely there is that sense of authority, right? Power, exactly. So with that angle, just to the choice of the collaboration of what we're trying to express, right? We have that communicated. So when we switch to being from a high angle, from above, how does this affect the photo? What do people feel like it changes, if anything? Vulnerability, right? And I will say, when I was doing this, and I wasn't surprised when I looked for more examples of this type of shot, there were many more images of women. And when I did it the other way around, there were many more images of men. And, another reflection of the sexism in our culture and how people utilize that to convey messaging. And yes, submission. Okay, perfect. Great. Thank you so much for all those comments. Exactly right. Right. I'm going to keep on going. So I wanted to move to what it does in terms of, the eyes, right? We've talked a lot about sort of thinking about where the light is coming from, and I would encourage you to think about where it's coming from in both of these. And then also, what happens, faces are so important in photography, right? And eyes, the windows to the soul, is very true. The eyes are so important in communicating in everyday life, obviously, but also in photography. And what does it do? This is right, the photographer is right at the eye level of this woman versus having this above angle. How does it shift it? Is she more or less accessible in one? Is she more intimidating in one? Is she more serious, intelligent? Any other adjectives that come to mind? More connection. Okay. Great. She's attractive. Okay. Is she attractive in both, or is she attractive in more in one than the other? Okay. So more serious at eye level. Okay. And she has a pretty close expression here, but you see more of her face, and the lighting is a little bit different. More intimidating. Right. And more serious. Okay, good. So I'm glad that that's translating for some of you. So the other thing that I wanted to point out is that not just in terms of these power dynamics that we're talking about, and these are all kinds of different ways that photography can communicate these messages. So here, hopefully this will be fairly obvious, but who's the boss of this team? Okay, boss lady, right. So hopefully it will be fairly clear that, boss lady is the focused one who's right here in the front, right? And it would be poor communication if it was, one of the gentlemen standing in the back row, right? That is not how the focus and the setup of this photo is intended, right? And maybe the second in command is the gentleman behind her, right? And, maybe this is a flow chart of their entire staff, right? Could be, but it's communicated pretty clearly here. And these are all things in terms of position. Also note, this is eye level, right? It makes it very accessible for this group. And it's very thoughtful in terms of how it's presented. Okay, and I see, whoops. So here, I was just going to put in one of my favorite Elliot Erwitt shots. Okay, right, everybody's seeing that, good. So again, speaking to angle and where the photographer is, right? And this is a classic photo of Elliot Erwitz from, I believe, the 50s. And, you think of this gentleman on the ground, literally with his camera, right? And he manages to see from the dog's perspective, this beautiful photo. So these all change, right? We don't know who this person is other than we know what we think is maybe a she wearing at that moment, right? But it's really the focus, we go towards the eyes naturally of the dog, right? Okay. So, okay, this other section I wanted to talk about is, especially in the field that you all work in, there's both the challenge of consent, especially with different patients that you're working with. And there's a line of what you want to try and create as authentic, right? So many fields that have challenging situations in terms of consent will stage photos. And I'm not putting a value judgment on whether that's good or bad, or, it can be useful for certain instances. And then here, it can be something that you can control more easily, right? Instead of capturing something as it's happening live. You may not be in the room when this consultation would happen. And so you set it up, right? So each has its pros and cons. So when you look at something that's happening in more of a news style, right? More of a journalistic, right? That's happening live, it communicates something different, right? So if I go back, right? So I want everybody to just take note of what it is how this picture feels and what it might be communicating versus this one. And then I believe I have another one here, right, of people working in the field and how different they are. Okay. All right. So this leads me to another point. When we're talking about sort of getting people's consent, as we spent more time talking in the first webinar, there's lots of different possibilities that people sometimes are aware of and sometimes aren't. So in this case, I picked two photos where you can't see people's faces, right? And they use beautiful natural light, and they give you a real sense of place just by the composition and the behavior of the people in the photo, right? So oftentimes in situations where I've been working where people are not comfortable being photographed, as you develop a relationship, you might be able to ask, would it be possible if we included you without showing your face? If that was something that was important for you all to communicate, right? So I think that just to make the point that there's many different ways that a photographer can approach a subject and to both gain consent and to continue a dialogue around, is this okay? Are you comfortable with this? And again, as we talked about in the first session, knowing and explaining the ramifications of what, an image being published, and the fact that once it goes out, into the whole world if it is used digitally. So just to make the point that there are options. And Right, visible and nonverbal communication. That's right. Right. And so I'm going to introduce what is a very complicated, and that could be an entire webinar on just color temperatures. But I want to just introduce this idea because I think it's important to start noticing this as you're out in the world and as you continue to take pictures. Our eye adjusts things so quickly, magically, incredibly gifted, a miracle that we have these amazing eyes that we do. And cameras that are registering light use what's called a Kelvin scale to register whether or not something is warmer or lighter. So here on the left, you'll see that candlelight, that remember that one image that we saw with the big group with everybody that had candles, is some of the warmest light. It gives off almost an orange red, right? And that golden hour, that sunset or sunrise where the rays are very long and very flattering, very warm light. That's why a lot of photographers like to use those time periods to be photographing outside. And some of the other pictures, we had one picture of the woman who was at the panel that was speaking with the glasses that was under fluorescent light. And then we talked about with daylight, the sort of harsh light, and we're going to look at that a little bit more. So this is just to give you an introduction to this idea that there's different qualities of light. And I think what I'm going to do here is stop for a brief example, just using a couple of items in our that we all have access to at home, and just bring some awareness in. And Francis, if it's possible, let me see if there's a way to make this bigger. I don't know if there's a way to make me and the sign language translator the only ones visible, just so that people will be able to see the screen more, because it'll make it easier for people. If it's not possible, it's okay, but if you could just focus on the two of us, that would be great. So what I'm going to do is have you focus on the quality of light that is around me, right? So thinking about that color temperature, right? There's light that's behind me that has a particular kind of hue, almost a certain color. And there's light that's right here, right? And if you were thinking about where the light was coming from, and I can confirm, seeing the light right here, that there's a light source that's coming in this way, right? And you can see that, right, by the shadows that are on this side of my face, right? That's how you're seeing the direction of the light. Now, hopefully what is visible to all of you, and I'll turn my camera a little bit here, is I have this curtain over here blocking out the outside light. And I want you to see what happens when, oh, other side, I forget that I'm backwards. When I pull this side out. So you see how the light that's coming from there is a little more blue? I hope everybody can see that. This will somewhat depend on your monitor and what device you're looking at this, but the outside light, the daylight, is much bluer. Okay, great. You can see that. Fantastic. So this interior light is a much warmer temperature, right? And so that's, in terms of the color temperature, is using that scale from the very red to the very blue, and also because it creates a different kind of mood, right? So a couple things I'm going to show here, just as knowing that many of you will be traveling with your phones, is that there's a couple different ways that you can alter light pretty simply, right? You can, if you can, I'm just going to reach over to this light that I have. You can switch the direction of the light. I'm just slowly moving. Whoops, now that light went out. So now this is purely daylight. And then this coming back on, that was actually somewhat helpful, is back to yellow, right? So I'm going to take my phone, and I just have my flashlight that's on this phone. And if you don't have one automatically, you can just download it. And I want everybody to keep their eye on the side of my face that's more in the shadow, right? So you can use a light as just like a flashlight from a phone, to add light to somebody's face. And I hope that it's clear enough resolution that you can see that this light that's coming from the phone is much cooler than the one that's the light bulb in this lamp, right? No, you were supposed to stay on. Why did you do that? So you can also, great, you can see it. You can also be creative with a phone, or if you're with somebody else, this makes it a lot easier in terms of moving the position here. I'll show more of what I'm doing. Moving the position, right, of the light from the side, further away, right, from below, you know, those scary pictures that, you know, you can make in the dark, scary pictures, you know, or above, right? These are all going to affect, and you're seeing the shadow of my glasses, right? That are going to be distractions for the viewer if you have something like that, right? So you want to be mindful of adding light, but also that you can help make a situation brighter if you need to by just putting something on a windowsill or on a desk or something else that is out of the frame of your picture, and moving another light that will help you create more light if the situation is too dark. This shows, this is a chart just to also show what I was just talking about in terms of the different color temperatures, right? So you have daylight, fluorescent, which tends to be on the green side to our naked eye, right? And incandescent light, which is the light that is being used on me right here, and also of this young woman. So again, just begin registering these different kinds of light and how the mood changes when we're looking at this person in terms of how the viewer is receiving the image. I don't want to take too much time on this, but I would imagine that one of these is more accessible to the viewer than others. And some people have different opinions on this, but I always go for the daylight picture or the warmer tone picture. The green ones are always least friendly for me. Okay, so I'm going to take a moment and look in the chat here. Okay, good. So people registering these light differences. That's great. And I'm going to keep on going. Okay, so here also is pretty clear what example of what I just showed in the room that I'm sitting in, right? She is, the speaker has a very yellow, almost as a tungsten light on this panel, and you can see the daylight behind her is blue, right? So that's a good example of color temperature. Whoops. Okay, so here I'm going to go forward with this idea about types of shots, right? So I think one thing that I've found that's super helpful as a photographer, and that especially for people that are more word familiar, it's sometimes difficult to communicate exactly what you want. You have in your mind's eye a type of photograph, but you can't articulate it that closely. So here I pulled these photos as just a sort of example of, you know, if somebody would have said, I want some photos of hands, right? So hopefully it's fairly clear to everybody that these all communicate very different things, right? Very different things based on what else is in the picture besides hands, how many people's hands, right? How close up it is, you know, whether there's an age differential, whether there's a ring, whether it's black and white or color. All of these different things are affecting how we are receiving this image, right? And what's being communicated. So I pulled one of these charts just to help think about ways of communicating back and forth around photography, and also ways of thinking for as you're sort of seeing things in the world, you know, how these different versions of close-up and long shots and bird's eye views, how all of these things, it's funny they call it worm's eye, the low angle view, right? So, and you'll see different things named differently, but how all these things affect what is being communicated, right? So if we saw that picture of the extreme close-up of the eye, we would have no idea where this person was, right? But on that extreme long shot, we have a sense of place, right? So these are just terms that will hopefully be useful for you all in terms of communicating. Okay, so in this section, I'm going to go quickly through what I've seen over the years as some of the most common mistakes in photography. Years and years ago, when I was first beginning as a photographer, a professor of mine said, you don't want to leave enough room for an airplane to fly by. So I sort of thought, what is he talking about? And here in the picture, I hope it's showing on your left, there's a lot of room above her head. So if I were also to move down on my camera, right, there's a lot of room that's up here. So unless it's intentional, like somebody has asked you, oh, I need room for text, for example, for something for our annual report or something, you know, sometimes that will happen. The image on the other side that doesn't have room for an airplane to fly over gives you much more information, and in my opinion is a better picture by itself, right, if we're not dependent on text. So just be aware when you're looking through pictures and when you're framing pictures, you're composing those edges, that you don't have a lot of excess room above their heads. It's a good general rule. And same thing here. So this is you know, perspective, just like that other dog photo that we looked at where we're at the dog's level, right? This is just, it's easier to take the picture on the left, right? You're just standing there, think of the position of the photographer and click. And, you know, it does convey a power over this dog, as we talked about. And it's a more generous portrait on the right of this dog, right? And you're getting down to its level, right? And so that's changing what's being communicated. Okay, and then careful with exposures, right? On the phones especially, make sure that you're tapping on the phone where you want it to expose. Sometimes it can go very over or very dark or very blurry, right? So just be careful of, I think I have one that's, no, that's a different one. So just be careful of exposure. That's one note there. And then here is a reminder, especially if you're in low light situations, right? Now, this communicates on its own, but it also, because of the blur, the viewer gets distracted by it a little bit in this case, right? So it's not as clear of a message as perhaps we would like. So one thing that I suggest to people, if they don't have a tripod, is because that would be one thing that would be a stabilizing force, is to make sure to use two hands on your if you're using a phone, and definitely on your cameras as well. And if it's in very low light, try and make, here, I'll back up a little bit so you can see, try and put your hands on your body, and so you're sort of creating a little bit of a tripod, right? So if your elbows are touching you, then that will stabilize you. Also, obviously, use desks, use other books, props, things that you can put them on. That will help you to stabilize shots if you don't have a tripod available. Also, leaning on walls, leaning on trees, that sort of thing. Anything that will make things you unlikely to move. So those are just some tips there. Another thing I also see a lot is that if this were, it's a beautiful beach, obviously, and it's missing a connection that is close to the person, right? It is too far away. And oftentimes we obviously are seduced by this beautiful setting, but in terms of thinking photographically, what it's communicating, being closer to people is important, you know, unless you have a very specific intention that you're conscious of, right? Okay. So again, exposure. So we lose the connection to the person in this photo because it's too dark. Beautiful sunset. And often a mistake is that the sun, right, is behind him. So it's backlit. And the camera will average things for the light, and so the person will go into the darkness here. So just be mindful of that. If you are on a phone, tap on the face, and that will encourage the phone to do the exposure for the face. And if you're using a DSLR or a mirrorless camera, you can either turn the person slightly towards the light. This is also a good trick for the phones, actually, but you can change the exposure manually on the other cameras. Okay, so again, back to choices and what you're communicating. So we talked at the beginning a little bit about hard light there on the top left, softer light, and this woman is completely in the shade on the top right. And then this is a wider angle shot on the bottom. And all of these, right, communicate differently. So choices that you all have to make when you're thinking about what it is that you're communicating and what it is that you're saying to the viewer. So if you do have to photograph somebody and you're outside and it's the middle of the day and you have this sort of hard light, always a good choice to put them completely in the shade. And that will give you this nice, the clouds act as a diffuser and it's nice even light. And hopefully it's clear to everybody that she's more comfortable, makes the viewer more comfortable. You can see more detail of her face. It's not as harsh, right? The light. Okay. And then this was just showing that, right, you have all this other information in the photo. It shows you context, but it can be a little bit distracting if your focus is going to be on her, right? Much more effective portrait. Okay, and then this similar idea, right, in terms of sun and shade, but I wanted to show the point about resolution. And I'm going to put in the chat in a minute. I know many of you use Android phones, so I'm going to share a link that will show you how to change your resolutions on your phone. So hopefully you all are seeing that this is a little pixelated, right? We're not able to see it really that clearly. And that's because it's a very low resolution. It's a very low resolution JPEG that is really only meant for phones. So when you put it on a bigger screen, even on a computer, it gets fuzzy and it almost looks like it's out of focus here. Let's share back this screen again. One of my favorite news photographers, Lindsay Dario, she was the one with the photograph of the women in blue and the silhouette. If you look at this photo on the right, I'm hoping this is big enough that you can see the numbers on the bottom right. Can somebody just tell me in the chat that you can make that out? Or I can try and make this a little bit bigger as well. Let's see. Can people see that that says 3000 by 1993? Maybe. Well, I'm hoping. Okay, there are a little bit of a delay. Okay, yes, you can see it. Great. So this is speaking to the resolution. Great. Yes, thank you so much. So if you click on other photos, right, it's going to switch to tell you what the resolution of these photos are. So this is helpful when you're thinking about how you're eventually going to use the photo. So something that is this low of a resolution, right, under 600 by 600, that's going to be, we're going to have, if it goes onto a big screen, it's going to get pixelated just like those other ones. So you want to aim for something that's a bigger scale to be used both in print and also if you're going to enlarge it, because it will keep the resolution. And so that's a useful thing in terms of if you're sending people into the field to photograph, to make sure that they have the settings on their phone or their cameras at the highest that they can photograph at. And that's a useful thing to keep track of. Okay, so that was a lot of information. And I want to leave some time for questions and just see how everybody's doing. I'm going to stop this. Can you throw more light on the resolution? So I think and tell me if I'm misunderstanding the question. So I think what you're saying is once you've taken the image, will adding light increase the resolution of the photo? Is that correct? And feel free to please come on camera. Voice is cutting out. Your voice is cutting out. Okay. Okay, yes, correct. So once you've taken the picture, the settings are fixed. So one rule of thumb is always that to try and take it at the highest that you possibly can, because you can always make it smaller if you need to. You can't go the other direction. So if you want to, if you're in a dark situation that is not giving you enough light, you still can keep a very high resolution image. And so make sure that your settings on your phone and on your camera are up as high as they can go when you're in dark settings, and begin experimenting with, like I said, if you are stabilizing your phone, and I often, if you're in a very dark situation, I take a deep breath in and then I hold my breath and then I take the picture, because your breathing creates motion, right? So that will create motion if you're using a phone. If you're on a regular camera, your settings should be above 60th in terms of your shutter speed. And that's a whole other discussion we're not going to get into, but thank you for that question. That's why I suggest that people always set at the highest resolution, especially on the phones. Any other questions? I'm going to jump in on this last section, as I see we're almost out of time here, and Eve has put in our evaluation, which we very much appreciate you taking the time to fill out. Oh, you're welcome. You're welcome for that. And so the last thing that I want to talk about just really quickly is sort of the different hats that you all are going to be wearing, right? I'm used to going in with one of you because my specific job is a photographer. So I'm assessing all of these things and more that we just went through in terms of where the light is coming from, where the angle is going to be, what we're trying to communicate, what are the important aspects to put into the photo. And you all are going to be wearing often multiple hats. So oh, thank you for pointing that out. And so the thing that I want to express is that if it's possible, to try and separate the time periods of your different tasks that you're doing, right? Try and have dedicated time where you put on your photographer hat, right? So that you can really think about the light, what you're including in the frame. Do you have the consent of the people that you're photographing? What are you communicating in this photo, right? As you're framing, it's important to try and take as much time as you can to focus yourself as a photographer, because I know sometimes you're doing other things and it's difficult to switch gears. But I highly recommend trying to do that. And also, of course, that communicating as much as you can about why it's important to make a photograph of somebody that you're working with, and what the objective, mission, goal is of your organization, and how you're going to use it, right? Super important. And we talked about that in the last webinar in terms of getting things in writing and making sure that people understand before they consent how you're going to use it and what the ramifications are before you even lift your phone or camera, right? And I always err, especially in arenas like yours where it's a particularly sensitive topic, always show the picture, and make sure that people are okay with it. It's sort of another layer of consent. And as we talked about briefly before, remember that you have options. If you have a good connection with somebody, and you have a longer term relationship, and maybe they want to participate and they support what you're doing, but they don't want to show their face, you can offer other options. And then you have a creative challenge in terms of, okay, how do I show this person, maybe without using their face as much, or, what are the things that I can utilize? So I'm going to look at, I hope Tonia is how you pronounce your name. I'm sorry if I'm not saying it correctly. You recommend a phone brand or camera brand that can be low end affordable, but can give great pics. Okay, so this is a question also with cameras that I often get. And I think now the phone technology has gotten so good that even I would just look at, and you can Google really quickly and see comparisons between the different Androids and the iPhones the iPhones are more dominant here in the US. As I understand, the Androids are more dominant in Africa, and certainly the Google Pix phones are fantastic quality cameras. They are also expensive, like the iPhones. So what I tend to do, even as a professional, because I have all kinds of other gear, is that I wait until they have some sort of deal and they give them away for free. And that's how I upgrade, even though I'm many iterations behind. But I wouldn't say that there's one. It sort of depends also on what kind of access you have to different phones and what works within your budget. So there's a lot of good information online. So I would just recommend doing searches, comparing phones that you have access to and are within your price point. Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure being in this space together with you, and thank you for all the amazing work you all do. And hopefully this was helpful for everybody. And enjoy the rest of your evening. Eve, do you have anything else you want to add?
Yes, thank you so much, Carolina. This was an excellent session, and I was actually practicing some of the tricks during the short break. And I want to proudly thank you, Olivia, for the excellent sign language translation. And remember, feedback is breakfast for champions. We value your feedback and take it seriously. So thank you very much for the feedback and for completing our session evaluation. And allow me to wish you a proudly wonderful rest of the day. Kwaheri. Thank you very much, everyone, for sharing your time with us today.